Hello everyone, welcome to American Picker's latest news. Mike Wolfe was always known for his love of antiques and his adventurous personality. Life appeared like a never-ending road trip packed of treasures waiting to be discovered. The sun was bright, and the broad road was his comfort zone. It was a calm morning in Nashville, Tennessee, where Mike had spent the prior few days examining a new collection. The breeze whispered through the trees as he drove, smiling as he thought of all the individuals whose lives he had touched with his devotion. But little did he realize, this calm excursion would shortly take a fatal turn. As he rounded a bend, the unexpected happened. The sound of screeching tires filled the air as Mike's antique automobile veered recklessly. The world whirled, and in a second, the car collided with a ditch. The impact was bone-shattering. The air was filled with the sound of twisted metal and broken glass. Mike's body was damaged, his face pale from the shock. His elbow, in particular, had borne the brunt of the accident, the bone broken in multiple places. He lost consciousness. By the time the paramedics arrived, Mike was hardly breathing. His face was covered in cuts, his body battered, and his arm, the one he relied on for so much of his life, was in parts. The ride to the hospital felt like a haze for Mike, a succession of disjointed flashes of light, the sound of sirens, and a calm, dark nothingness. The hospital was a frenzy. Nurses raced around him, as doctors worked furiously to stabilize him. His family was immediately alerted about the accident. His wife, Jody, went to the hospital with a panic-stricken heart. The waiting room was full with friends and relatives, all too terrified to talk. They could only wait and pray. The doctor stepped in with a grim countenance, outlining the severity of Mike's illness. His elbow issue was the most alarming. The bone was shattered, and there was a chance of irreparable harm. The path to rehabilitation would be long, and it was questionable if he would regain complete function of his arm. His family sat in startled silence, each one contemplating the weight of what had just happened. Mike's world had altered in a split second, and no one knew what the future contained. As the days went, Mike's condition slowly stabilized. He opened his eyes to find himself surrounded by the sterile walls of a hospital ward. The pain in his arm was tremendous, and he couldn't move it. He felt helpless. The man who had spent his life seeking for treasures, gathering stories from the past, now found himself unable to even raise a coffee cup. It was a crushing blow, one that compelled him to confront not just his physical limitations, but his deepest fears. During his stay, Mike's family remained by his side. Jody was a constant presence, bringing comfort and strength. She spoke words of encouragement, even as her own heart was torn with worry. The youngsters visited, their innocent looks bringing both joy and pain. Mike attempted to grin for them, but the agony in his body and the worry about his future made it impossible to retain his customary optimism. The road to rehabilitation was tough. Each day was a challenge. Mike had always been a man of action, a person who thrived on freedom and movement. Now he was chained to a bed, struggling with the simplest tasks. Physical treatment began, but every movement was excruciating. His once strong and powerful arm was now an object of frustration, refusing to comply. He pushed himself harder, but the pain was a continual reminder of his vulnerability. It felt as though every stride forward was greeted with 2 steps back. During his long solitary hours in the hospital room, Mike found himself ruminating on his life. He pondered about his childhood, about the trip he had traveled to get to where he was. He remembers the early days of American Pickers, the excitement of uncovering forgotten artifacts, and the satisfaction of sharing those discoveries with others. But now, at his most vulnerable position, he had to come to terms with the fact that some things were beyond his control. Weeks stretched into months, and the recovery process was gradual. There were moments of development, little successes that would have been easy to overlook in the past. One day, Mike moved his arm slightly, experiencing a flicker of optimism. It wasn't much, yet it was enough to kindle a spark within him. He wasn't done yet. Despite the agony and disappointments, Mike maintained his recuperation. There were tears, there was frustration, and there was doubt. But through it all, he never gave up. His family remained by his side, supporting him through the hardest days. His pals from the vintage world sent words of love, and even fans of the show launched fundraisers to help with his medical needs. The outpouring of support was amazing. Mike learned that he was never completely alone. As the months passed, Mike's body progressively healed, but the emotional scars lingered. He strained to rediscover the old Mike Wolfe, the bold, passionate man who could conquer anything. But he began to learn that recovery wasn't only about restoring a broken body, it was about healing the mind and soul as well. He began to rethink what strong meant. It wasn't just about muscle or endurance, it was about resilience, about finding bravery in the face of hardship. The day arrived when Mike was finally able to stand on his own, his arm still weak but functioning. He had made it. The recuperation wasn't complete, and he knew the path was far from over, but he was stronger now. He had survived, and in doing so, he had learnt more about himself than he ever believed imaginable. Mike Wolfe sat in his physical therapy room, the sound of stretching bands breaking against the air. His arm, once shattered in 1,000 pieces, now moved with slow, laborious movements toward healing. Every muscle screamed in protest as he tried to lift his arm, but he was resolute. The agony had become a daily companion, yet it no longer held him back. He recalled his first days of therapy, when the simplest movement felt impossible. Back then, even the concept of raising a spoon felt like a mountain. Now, he could barely handle a fork. It wasn't much, yet it was everything. His therapist encouraged him, pushing him beyond his limitations, and today was another milestone in his path. It had been months since the accident, and the road to recovery had been slow, but Mike was starting to feel like himself again. That night, Mike sat alone in the living room. The weight of stillness pressed in on him as he stared at his reflection in the glass, seeing the faint glow of the streetlight highlight his sleepy face. There was a strong sense of exhaustion in his eyes. For months, his life had been on pause, relegated to routine doctor visits and interminable therapy sessions. He had spent his life traversing the country, choosing treasures and connecting with people, but now he was trying to connect with himself. "Why am I doing this?" he whispered to himself. The notion had crossed his mind every day for the past week. Every action of his arm reminded him of the accident, of how far he had fallen, and how much had been taken from him. His thoughts was a whirlwind of frustration, mistrust, and fear. What if he would never be the same? What if he could never return to the life he once knew? It was a concept that troubled him in the silence of the night, when the world outside was still, and the weight of his suffering seemed heavier. In the end, Mike Wolfe's story wasn't just about an accident or a shattered arm. It was about the power of community, the significance of family, and the indestructible human spirit. Through the toughest moments of his life, Mike discovered a strength within himself that he hadn't realized existed. He understood that the path ahead would still be tough, but now, with the love and support of those around him, he was ready to face whatever came next. Mike returned to his employment, not as the same man who had left the road that day, but as a stronger, smarter, and more thankful version of himself. The ancient world still awaited him, but now it was with a new perspective, one that included not just the treasures of the past, but the strength to face the future. Jody, Mike's wife, got up early as usual, the lovely morning light pouring through the drapes. She had been by Mike's side through every twist and turn of this road, but she too had her moments of uncertainty. She realized that Mike wasn't the same person he had been before the accident. He was quieter, more withdrawn, and it saddened her to watch him like this. "Mike," she said from the doorway, her voice faint but warm. "Are you awake?" Mike turned slowly, his face fatigued but pleased for her presence. "Yeah, just thinking," he responded quietly. She moved over to him and sat down next him. "I know it's been hard," she said, resting a hand on his. "But you're stronger than you realize." Mike's eyes moved toward her. "I don't feel like it." "You don't have to feel strong all the time," she said. "You're getting better, and that's all that matters." He grinned weakly but didn't answer. His head was still lost in the fog of his frustrations, but her words offered him a little sense of serenity. She was right. The path was lengthy, yet he was still walking it. The day had come. Mike, still feeble, but with a sense of resolve rising within him, returned to his beloved antique business. His workers greeted him with cheers and praise. Though his arm was still not totally functional, he could feel the usual pleasure of the hunt, the exhilaration of unearthing ancient antiquities. The business seemed like home, and the familiar faces of his colleagues brightened his spirits. Mike paused in the doorway of the shop, taking in the sight of it all. For the first time since the accident, he didn't feel like an alien in his own life. He was still a little unsteady, his arm still in a sling, but there was something exhilarating about being back where he genuinely belonged. "Feels good to be home," Mike stated gently to his crew, beaming as they praised him for making the trek back. "Mike, we missed you around here," one of his co-workers said. "It's not the same without you." Mike nodded, grateful for their kindness. But in that moment, he recognized that his quest wasn't only about mending physically. It was about rediscovering what he liked, what made him who he was. Being back in the shop reminded him of his passion, the fire that had pushed him for so many years. And though he wasn't totally recovered, he now realized that the process of healing didn't simply involve his body, it involved his emotions and intellect as well. As Mike sat around the dinner table with friends and family, he reflected on how much had changed. Not just with his body, but with the relationships surrounding him. The event had brought about a transformation in how he regarded the world and the people in it. He had always been driven by his work, by his love for finding treasures, but now he recognized that the most important riches in life were the individuals who had stuck by him when he needed them most. You know, Mike continued, lifting his glass of water, this whole experience has been hard, but it's also taught me something. I used to think that finding the next great antique was the most important thing. But I've learned that the people who care about you, your family, your friends, they're the real treasures. Jody smiled across the table. That's the Mike I remember, she continued, her eyes gleaming with fondness. Mike chuckled quietly. I guess I'm still that guy, just a little more broken. His friends and family laughed, but it was a chuckle filled with love, not pity. They recognized that Mike had gone a long way. He had recovered his power, his passion, and his place in the world. And though the path ahead would certainly be tough, Mike knew he was no longer walking it alone. A few weeks later, Mike sat outdoors in the tranquility of his backyard, watching the sunset. His arm had mended dramatically, and though he wasn't fully back to full strength, he felt a feeling of tranquility he hadn't known in months. The future still held uncertainty, but Mike had learned to accept it, to meet it head-on. He didn't need to have all the answers. He didn't need to be the same person he was before the accident. He had changed, and in that shift, he had found a deeper sense of purpose. Maybe this isn't about going back to who I was, he thought aloud. Maybe it's about becoming who I'm supposed to be now. The wind rustled through the trees, and for the first time in a long while, Mike felt at ease. His life, his work, and his recuperation were no longer a series of struggles to be won. They were a trip, one that had already begun to reshape him in ways he never planned. Mike stood once more in his shop, but this time, he wasn't just a collector of antiques, he was a collector of life's events. The shelves were loaded with items from the past, but Mike's heart was bent on the future. With his team by his side and the unshakable support of his family, Mike was ready to resume his work, but now with a fresh sense of purpose. Let's see what treasures we can find today, he stated to his staff with a smile. But more importantly, let's see what new treasures life has in store for us. As he turned to face the shelves once more, Mike realized that the voyage was far from over. There were still many challenges ahead, but he was no longer terrified. He had learned that the road to healing wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about enjoying the trip, with all its twists and turns, and moving forward.